what do you do, and how have you been able to grow so fast in that UK business?
Fundamentally, we believe that renewable energy, a clean energy future, is a cheaper energy future. And our job is to build the system that makes that possible, that brings that benefit to households, but also to businesses and to economies. And so I think it's kind of like we have to do everything to make that real, because if you try and do one bit of the system, it doesn't work. For example, if we believe that renewable energy is cheapest if you use what's being consumed, you can't do that if you don't really have real-time data on what's going on in generation, if you don't have some control over the grid, if you don't have control over you've got to have the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And so really what we're doing is, I think, trying to do with an energy system built around renewables what the likes of Edison did for the energy system originally. And in some ways, if we could all start with a clean sheet of paper, it would be easier. But we start with the legacy systems, the legacy infrastructure, and with no criticism of anyone, the legacy mindsets that think that energy's got to work in a certain way. The reason we've got to do all of this is we ain't got very long to do it. Mm-hmm. I think the world would be going renewable anyway, even if it weren't for climate change, eventually, because it is cheaper. The clock is ticking on climate, and we've got to move faster than anyone realizes to bring something that actually is going to be better anyway.
Yeah. You also built a software platform to kind of run that electric retail business, and that's Kraken, right? And so it seems like there's a couple ways you make money. Like you're actually sourcing clean power and selling it to your customers, and then you're also selling this kind of software platform that you can license to other utilities, right? Can maybe make sure everyone knows kind of the nuances of that multifaceted business model.
Yes, I mean, the background of the founders was we came from building enterprise software. And actually, we had the insight that you could build software platforms in the 21st century that brought this cheaper, greener power to life faster, and in a way that customers will absolutely love. But when we spoke to energy companies, they're typically very conservative, understandably, by the way, very conservative. And we realized that rather than trying to persuade them, the only way we could do it was to do it ourselves. And so we actually built an energy company as the demo client, the trial for the software platform, Kraken. Now, it so happens the energy company is going very big. So
that's the one that's the second biggest in the UK.
Yeah.
It's like that was sort of, you just had to test out the platform, and while you were at it, you became one of the biggest retailers.
I mean, genuinely, that's what happened. And kind of part of it was, we said, look, in a renewable world, consumers have to be at the center. If everyone's got an electric car, as one day they will, and they all get home and plug it in, it's going to melt down grids. We're going to need more coal power plant. I mean, it's a disaster. If, on the other hand, they have electric cars, they're integrated completely with the energy system, they get home, they plug it in, and the cars will optimize their charging times. By the way, not just to grab renewable power when it's abundant, when the wind's blowing, sun's shining. But, for example, if you've got a bunch of electric cars in the same street, they may all start charging at different times so that you don't need more infrastructure in the street. Now, that's just the very beginnings. By the way, we already do this for 150,000 cars in the UK, 25,000 of them with fully optimized. Like, just every car's got a different schedule that's revised every day, that's available in the app if you want to see what's going to go on. So this stuff isn't the future, it's here now. And the quicker we deploy it, the cheaper and quicker we can transition to a renewable system. Because the magic that's happening at the moment is renewable generation is becoming cheaper and dramatically more available at exactly the same time that we're changing how we consume energy. As we move from internal combustion engine to battery electric vehicles, as we move from gas furnaces and gas boilers to heat pumps, the opportunity now is to connect that new form of consumption, that new form of generation, in the way that actually makes people's lives better and cheaper. So going green is no longer a sacrifice. It's actually the thing that people will do anyway.
Yeah, and I'm interested in you mentioned that coming into this, you hadn't really been in the energy sector. You were coming at it from different sectors of the economy. And how did that kind of open up your perspective to how to tackle these problems? Because as a longtime observer of the clean tech industry, I'd say it's not always strongest at like reaching consumers and kind of putting consumers first. There's a lot of very wonky smart founders who have a technical solution that a utility engineer might totally understand, and like the broader public's just not in that picture. But you've got these cute octopus thingies, representing your company, and how did that kind of background in building software systems and consumer-oriented products like influence what you did here?
I think it really helped for a lot of the initial thinking. The people who built Uber didn't come from the minicab or taxi background. The people who built Airbnb weren't hoteliers. And I think when you come at it fresh, you really do think about it differently. And there's a couple of interesting things. First of all, you don't have the same hang-ups. So when Uber first launched, do you remember, I think it's probably 5, 6, 7 years, you couldn't pre-book an Uber. It was real time or not at all. Now, anyone from the traditional cab industry would have said pre-booking is the most important feature. Because otherwise, how can you get to an airport or to a job interview or to a hospital appointment? But the people who built Uber came from technology, and they knew that pre-booking comes with an astonishing number of workflow challenges. What happens if the driver's late? What happens if the rider doesn't show up? What happens if they're stuck in traffic? And so if you try and add that feature in at the beginning, you're going to create a horrible set of customer experiences. And you're better off just not having it. I sat in industry meetings for quite a while before I realized that when they said behind the meter, they meant inside the house. Because if you think about energy as a consumer-based business, behind the meter is the grid. And honestly, I was sat there going, hang on, because it tells you where they come from in thinking. This isn't a criticism of anyone at all. In the old energy world, where you had a defined demand curve every day, it varied by season and by geography, but basically a grid wakes up in the morning, they know what the curve's going to be, and then they can just stack the rectangles of power from power stations to meet that need. In that world, the consumer perhaps didn't matter so much.
Right. And yeah, so for people, the behind the meter is often referring to like behind the meter solar is rooftop solar. It's behind the electrical meter in someone's house, but you're right, that's from a perspective of like the big grid. And that's behind that way, as opposed to the other way around.
And so in a renewable world, what you want to be doing is you want the people running the system. I mean, you don't really want people running the system, just a big robot. But you want the big robot, the data-centric stuff that's running the system, to wake up in the morning. I mean, it's always awake. But and it kind of looks at the weather forecast, and it works out kind of when we should be trying to maximize consumption and minimize consumption, and it kind of optimizes and automates that. Now, that entire reversal of the system takes quite a lot of leaps of faith. With the best one, it's incredibly hard for incumbents, particularly in highly regulated, mission-critical sectors, to be able to do that. It's much easier for a small disruptor to try it. And I remember people said, no one cares about their energy company, their utility. They just want to switch the lights on. And the reality was we thought, well, somehow Perrier and Evian have made a brand out of water. Right? I mean, literally the most basic, and people pay 600 times more for a liter of water in a bottle of Evian than they do when they get it from the tap. Now, if you can create a brand that people have somehow got an association with in that world, you can absolutely do it in energy, where we rely on it every day. Not only do we rely on it, for our stuff at home, we increasingly rely on it for our transport, and of course, it's the very commodity that could be the greatest contributor to trashing our planet and making it unlivable. If you can't make that interesting to people, right, I think we probably need to rethink what industry we're in. So, and I guess for us, this fella was just you take an intangible product and you make it tangible. And we started giving these away when we did TV ads. It was sign up with us and we'll send you a free one. We bought 10,000 of them. We had 9,985 left. So it turned out that that world where you think you know what you're doing, you get surprised. What was magic was, because we had 9,985, it was like, what should we do with them? And so we saw a customer tweeted something about us, because it was quite nice. And we sent her one. And within minutes of her opening the package, she tweeted a photo, and she put it on her car, and her kids were holding it. Oh, that's quite cool. And we started sending them out to people on when they said things on social media. And before you knew it, we'd run out. And we've now got through hundreds of thousands, and everything from presidents to prime ministers have taken these things. They visit our office, and they've got to take them with them. Now, that's just one way of making energy tangible. Obviously, there are vastly more. But the point really being, you can build a brand in anything. Once you've built a brand, people will then trust you with the really important stuff, like, sorry, they're very hardy. With the really important stuff like optimizing an electric car and making sure that when they get up in the morning, there's going to be enough energy in it to drive. So, this relationship building rather than transactional, I think, is a massive change in energy.
Do you refer to your customers as ratepayers?
I mean, honestly, that language says it all, doesn't it? And I don't get me wrong, I've got no criticism of the existing companies and the way it's done. The point is the opportunity now to change it. And to move energy from being a sort of something like DMV where you get what you're given and it may or may not be what you'd want, to one where if you want to get the very cheapest power, let us optimize your car charging. Let us put solar panels and a battery in your house and we'll just optimize all of that and you don't think about it. But no longer is it a commodity that's always the same. Because as soon as you're doing any optimization, you can't compare rates, right? You actually got to look at who's got the technical capability to do a better job of that. And that's the kind of thing that, therefore, you've really got consumers to be able to build a degree of understanding and trust and allow competing ideas to deliver the best value and the greenest power quickest.
Gotcha. So I want to break down, I mean, you're involved in a lot of different activities in the kind of future of the grid. Sometimes it's called the grid edge space in the industry jargon, but using new hardware and software to do interesting things with energy. Could we kind of run through the spectrum of activities just so the audience has a sense? So starting with providing retail power, and it's all carbon free. Like any customer buying power from you, it's clean to begin with. Then you mentioned the smart car charging. Can you talk a little more about what specifically you're doing with that?
Yes, I mean, first of all, this thing about the green energy, of course, in almost every advanced economy, you have some sort of government-controlled grid system. And so you've got a whole load of generators pile the electrons in and a whole load of consumers or utilities pull it out. And so the way that we define green today really relies on everyone trusting that kind of the certification behind that. Now, I think that's a good solution, but it's nowhere near as good as it could be. And what we really try to build is a world where we have the right amount of generation at any moment in time for all of our customers from green sources, and then we flex the demand from our customers. We help our customers use it at the times it's greenest. And I think, hand on heart, that's a greener system than one where we have a bunch of certificates based on what's going in and out of the system.
That's true. That's right.
Right.
And actually, we should unpack. So, are you're going out and developing your own power plants to supply all this, buying it from other producers? How are you getting that green power in the first place?
Yeah. So we start off by buying it from other producers, but we now got around, I guess, $8 billion worth of our own generation. And that's, there's another $35 billion lined up.
Like being built in the next few years? Or?
No, money sitting ready to be deployed. One of the biggest challenges, I think, and we should probably move on to this at some point, but one of the biggest challenges in moving to a renewable world is the permitting and the grid queues and the constraints from the government-operated part. And I'm not ragging on the governments. It was built for a different era.
Yeah.
But today, there are trillions of dollars worth of investment desperate to be deployed in building new renewable infrastructure that cannot get built. And we know this can be fixed because during the energy crisis, which is still ongoing, but was particularly harsh a few months ago in Europe, Germany built 5 liquid natural gas terminals in 1 year. Now, if you can, and by the way, look, I have no complaint about doing everything we could to get through that crisis and reduce our reliance as a society on Russian gas. But I think it speaks to the sea change we need in policy that almost anywhere in Europe, we will have to wait 5 to 10 to 15 years to get a grid connection or planning permission or permitting for renewable generation. Here in the US, a world in which, often things can move fast. Again, even in states that are dynamic, you can be waiting 5 or 10 years. And yet, when it comes to fossil fuels, somehow, magically, Germany passed a bunch of rules, a bunch of laws that meant they didn't have to do the normal environmental rules to build the stuff that trashes the environment. Now, and I'm not blaming Germany at all, but we need everyone to be putting pressure on the politicians to change this. We talked about the importance of consumer engagement and branding and how they use energy, but the same is in how we generate it. So for example, because of the tech, Kraken, the platform, the software, we're able to run an incredible product, which is called the Fan Club. You know, turbine is a big fan, right? If someone lives near one of the turbines that's in the Fan Club, they get cheap electricity, 20% off when it's windy, 50% off when it's very windy, right? And what we're doing is we're giving people the benefit of local renewable generation.
And in the UK, isn't there quite a lot of pushback to the onshore wind too?
So we've reversed this, right?
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the UK government literally passed a law that made it almost impossible to build onshore wind. Not anything else, just onshore wind, because it's politically, expedient to do so. Today, between 81 and 87% of people would want onshore wind near them if it meant cheaper bills. Now, I think the real magic is not saying, look, if we build a gazillion wind farms across your nation, we promise your bills are lower, because people don't believe that. It's if we build a wind farm in our brand near your town and you switch to our company, you'll get cheaper power. And then it's totally and utterly transparent to the consumer that it's their choice. If you don't want wind near you, you're going to be paying more for energy. If you do want it near you, you'll be paying less.
Do the turbines have a little octopus on them, or?
Right. Well, actually, we put massive stickers on the side of them. But often, in most geographies, wind turbines have to be white, so they blend in with the sky and they're less kind of obtrusive. So what we do is we put laser display units at the bottom, and we light them up at night. Not all the time, but for example, we've got somewhere we light them up green when it's cheap. And if you live nearby and it's green, you can get cheap power.
Kind of like when the skyscrapers have a light that sort of says what the weather is.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, ooh, very windy.
And the
Check your bill.
Yeah, the whole thing is trying to say, look, in the past, renewable generation was a bunch of, anonymous trucks would turn up and build a bunch of anonymous turbines on a local beauty landscape. And then you'd see a new line appearing on your energy bill saying, subsidies for green energy. I mean, you couldn't make it less popular. And we just flip that around and we say, if you want it, fill in this web form, we'll come and build one near you, and you get cheap power. Incredible.
Wow. Okay. So you're doing the localized wind kind of rewards program in the wake of the gas crunch from the Ukraine invasion and all that. There's been this push to get off of gas heating, right, and switch to electric heat pumps for heating and cooling homes. How are you tackling that?
Does everyone know how a heat pump works? If you're confident you know how it works, can you put your hand up? Fantastic. 2 hands there. Brilliant. And a hand here. Brilliant. And one there. Okay, so first of all, the fundamental magic of a heat pump is it uses 1 kilowatt of electricity to make, call it 3 kilowatts of heat. With gas, with any form of combustion, you can never get better than 1 unit of heat from 1 unit of energy. And by the way, you often not get very close to that. So a heat pump is fundamentally 3, 4, maybe more times more efficient than any form of burning stuff. That's the kind of rule of physics. By the way, if you wonder how that can possibly happen, you go, and Newton's third law or whatever, you can't create more energy. It's not creating energy. It's a bit like if you have an oil well running on an oil generator, an oil engine, 1 gallon of oil can extract hundreds of gallons of oil from the ground. In the same way, 1 unit of electricity can extract several units of heat from the air or from the ground. That's the way a heat pump works.
It's like grabbing it out of the air.
It's literally pumping heat from one place to another. That's why I call it. Anyway, so the magic of the heat pump then is it's got this multiplier. That means, by the way, heat pumps are so efficient that even if you generate the electricity for a heat pump using gas, it takes less gas to heat a home than it would do if you burn the gas in a gas furnace.
Wow. Okay.
So the reason you'll see suddenly this love for heat pumps is that if you're going to have a green electric energy system, obviously we need heat pumps. But even now, they will reduce our usage of fossil fuels. Heat pumps are currently a bit too expensive, and in most places electricity is more expensive than it should be. So we need tax reform. So instead of, in most countries, we put all these taxes on electricity we don't put on gas, and that means consumers don't see the benefits. We need to sort that out. We need to make heat pumps smarter. If heat pumps are grid aware, like we talked about electric vehicles, most homes The heat pump can have some intelligence that works out the thermodynamics of the house. It knows how long it takes to heat it up. It knows how long the house can hold the heat. And that means the heat pump can actually use less energy during peak times, more off-peak, but provide a perfectly comfortable house. If we do this sort of stuff, we don't just get the 300% efficiency. We get 400, 500. We get so much more efficiency out of a heat pump. The key thing here is understanding, a bit like a Tesla wasn't just a car with, some batteries and motors. It was a rethink of the car. We're rethinking all these ways we use energy now.
And so if you're a Octopus customer in the UK or elsewhere, can you say, hey, I want a heat pump, and you do that? Or like how is it reaching the household?
Yes, I mean, the UK is so in love with gas. I mean, I can't tell you. It's like, now, by the way, gas furnaces, boilers are so unreliable that people spend more money insuring their gas boilers than they do insuring their houses. But there's a perception among politicians and the media that somehow that these are loved devices. And so what we're doing now is really kind of creating transformationally better heat pumps. So and because we couldn't find the ones on the market that would do that, we're kind of we've built our own factory, and we've designed our own heat pumps. We've got prototypes in market now, and we'll have thousands rolling off the production line certainly within a year or so.
You're a software company sourcing clean power, and then you're like, oh, let's build a heat pump factory.
We'll do whatever it takes. The best tech businesses in the world do this. If you look at Amazon, Amazon operates ships, right? It used to be, I remember when people thought Amazon was an online bookstore, right? It now operates ships and planes, right? So if you want to change the world quickly for the better, and you've got technology at the core, you often have to change everything around it as well, and that's what we'll do.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, and that's, a very live topic in the U.S. too. There's a lot of new incentives for heat pumps in the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's much earlier in the adoption curve here than in, say, like Japan or like a lot of Asia. It's just like everywhere already has a heat pump, and it's clearly doable at scale. But for whatever reason, we haven't kind of built the like workforce and the consumer awareness out in this part of the world. And so you're tackling that too. Are there any other like kind of wild ideas you're putting into practice just before we move on to other things? Like,
we've just in the last 6 months launched a program called Zero Bills Homes. So these are energy homes that will never have an energy bill. We've collaborated with house builders. And by the way, initially it was the most innovative house builders. And now all the traditional ones have come looking for joining the program. We basically looked at the data of energy usage from customers that have got batteries at home, heat pumps, and solar panels, and we looked back on their historical usage, and we were able to build models that worked out for a given home what their usage patterns were. And from this, we took billions of data points. From this, we've actually now created a bunch of models that mean if a house builder gives us the footprint, the design of a house, we can say how much solar paneling, what size heat pump, what size battery, what kind of hot water heater it needs. And then we'll optimize all of that. And we're confident enough in the data we've done that we'll underwrite. It won't get an energy bill for at least a decade. And by the way, it'll probably never get one. I mean, you never know what's on 10 years. But basically, it'll never get an energy bill. And we'll underwrite that for 10 years. And the key here is that, as long as we're able to optimize the equipment in the home, you've got this multi-way win. The homeowner will never have the anxiety of a utility bill. The house builder has got a house that is demonstrably more attractive that they try to sell. We talk about net zero houses, but zero carbon houses, but they're nowhere near attractive enough that people flood to them. But now we've got people flooding to a house that's better for the environment. We started the program last year with just 2 houses in August or September. Within 6 months, we've got several hundred signed up, and we've got almost 10,000 in the pipeline.
So the customer buys a house, like they could buy a different house, but they're buying this brand new one, maybe paying a little premium for the new appliances, the kind of more efficient appliances, and they sign up to be kind of managed by your software for 10 years, but they're not even paying you for that?
Yeah.
They're okay, and then
they just live there.
They just live, and they don't pay an electricity bill forever.
Don't pay.
Okay.
And no gas. In fact, part of the magic here is the additional cost for building these houses is lower than you think, because they don't need any gas pipes, they don't need any gas meters, they don't have a gas boiler, they don't have gas cookers, they don't have, all of the stuff, the legacy stuff you might have got with gas. They're just designed to be a house that you live in without thinking about it, and you never get a bill.
I think that the theme that we keep kind of circling back around is how you're moving very quickly on a lot of different things in a space where, electricity providers, utilities tend to be kind of constitutionally conservative, and it's not anyone's fault. It's like they have these legacy systems, legacy infrastructure. There's a very high priority on not messing up and shutting off the power to people, and so even like innovative utilities will often take many years to trial something, a new technology. They want to start small and pilot it, and then test it with maybe more customers, and then and it just takes a long time to get from the idea to rolling it out to thousands of people. And then you're saying, oh, we had this idea 6 months ago. Now there's 10,000 people doing it in real life. Like, how do you change that adoption timeline in this industry where like a lot of people really struggle to do that?
So at the core of all of this is Kraken, the technology platform. Kraken is a full stack in tech terms for running an energy company. It's so conservative, it's so reliable. It runs 50% of UK energy retail, either live or licensed. It operates 45% of the UK's grid-scale batteries. It operates Europe's largest virtual power plant. It operates 30-ish% of Australian energy. It operates in 7, 8, 9 geographies. It's the same code base around the world. In fact, if you think about it, a traditional energy company's software infrastructure is made up of 10 or 20 different systems, all bolted together, and then suffering from as soon as you try and change one of them, the others fall down, and you can't change anything.
And that's like all these kind of behind the scenes, billing and like all the kind of like business software that the customer probably doesn't have.
And so if you're risk averse,
yeah,
I actually think that that legacy stuff is far riskier than actually running modern software, right? I had a client who was a legacy enterprise software business, and they had a quarterly release schedule. Kraken's released 150 times a day. Now, every time it's released to 14 instances around the world. It's the same code base for every client in every geography. And that enables you to have all of your global talent, all your global tech talent, working on the same problems, solving them globally at the same time. Instead of, you think about the way utilities have worked, where every utility's got a bunch of different people trying to fix bunches of different systems in different ways. I mean, that terrifies me. I mean, that's a genuine concern.
And often it's also outsourced to, they'll have contracts with Oracle or someone, like that, so it's not directly controlled in-house, right?
That's right. And so I think the first thing is saying, like, when you get the opportunity to think hard about what risk really is, that's risky. Now, no one's risk-free, but I know which risk I'd rather be, responsible for. I think the second thing then is helping understand what software can do. When the iPhone was launched, it came with iOS, the operating system, and 8 built-in apps, an email app, a text app, and a couple of others. It wasn't obvious that that underlying operating system that enabled an initial few apps to work would develop to the point that you'd have this flourishing world of capability through new apps. Everything from the revolution of transport through Uber, through to, QR codes in COVID and everything else, all enabled by the fact you'd moved to an operating system and a few bits of tech on the phone itself that were fundamentally different than we'd had before. That's what we can do with energy. So when I talk about the zero bills home, once you've got this kind of 21st, I don't know what you call it really, but a really modern underlying operating system for energy, capabilities like building it, the Zero Bills Home is really just an app on Kraken. The dynamic charging of electric vehicles is another app on Kraken. The ability for, in the UK, when it gets, when electricity is in the kind of quite short supply, the national grid turn on the most expensive and filthy diesel generators to maintain supply. And instead of doing that, what we've pioneered is paying customers to move their consumption away from the period when the diesel would have been used. And instead of giving the money to the diesel polluters, we give it to the consumers. 40% of all of our eligible customers, 600,000 households, participate when we do this. That's the equivalent of turning off 2 of the UK's biggest cities. And that's just consumer choice because it saves them a bit of money. Right? And it's not even hard work. It's literally like instead of turning your oven on at 6 o'clock, you turn it on at 7. Job done. Instead of turning on your dishwasher straight after dinner, you leave it an hour. This isn't inconvenient.
And that's a huge number, like for the world of grid programs to harness customer flexibility. That's like a very large number of people participating. And how long did it take to spin that up?
Deborah, you did it actually. How long?
Weeks?
Yeah, a few
okay.
weeks, right?
And that was to respond to the gas supply crunch heading into the winter.
If you spend a year spinning this up, and it turns out you hadn't quite got the offer right for the consumers and they didn't take part, you'd call it a failure. If it takes a few weeks and you get in touch with the consumers, you put the app alerts out and message them and they don't take part, you iterate. And you iterate and you iterate and you iterate, and then you hit magic. And I think one of the biggest challenges in energy is so much of our innovation is based around very, very slow cycles that most innovation is just declared a failure or not going to work. Or worse than that, we set it in stone at some suboptimal level and you never change it again. But the continued iteration, and in fact on that program, the first time we ran it, I think less than 200,000 households took part. And it just increased and increased and increased.
And you're tweaking and
you're tweaking and you're messaging. And for example, we found that, we instead of giving people money, we gave them reward points. And then we gave them kind of multipliers and bonuses if they did a winning streak and, prizes if they were in the top 5%. But human behavior, like if you go in the supermarket, you'll see hundreds of different ways of influencing our purchasing decisions. And yet too often I'll read a really well-researched paper in energy that says, we tried this program. It'll have one way. And we need to move into the world where we can do so much more.
The numbers you shared about how much of these grids are actually running on your platform means you're a lot of your fellow retailers are using your software platform, and I feel like that's not an obvious. Like on some level, you're equipping your competitors with better tools to compete with you.
Our founding mission was to use technology to enable a cleaner energy system cheaper and faster. And that means, originally we had to do it on our own brand. We could take that risk because we didn't have a lot of the constraints that an incumbent provider would have. So we could innovate, but actually if we want to make the biggest difference, we share that innovation with others. And actually you end up with this remarkable capability, I think, which is when we license to a rival, they're actually a client and a customer, and we want them to be unbelievably successful. And so we innovate typically in the Octopus brand that piles enormous amounts of new innovation, testing and learning in the real world that then, when it's proven, more traditional risk-averse clients get immediate access. Now, of course, they can do their own innovation. I mean, it's like an operating system, just like they can build their own apps on it. But their ability to take the apps that have been tested and tried elsewhere enables them to innovate more safely and more securely. Now, fundamentally, we've got to decarbonize an entire global energy system in 10 or 15 years. I'll take every route I can.
And they're not sort of suspicious of you as how do they know you won't toggle some levers and give yourself a little advantage, if you're all running the same backend?
It's incredibly important to us if we want to win new clients to demonstrate that existing ones are getting incredible results. Global energy majors will often collaborate on exploration for new, gas and oil reserves. One of them will then get the license, they'll do a JV with another, one of them will then get the offtake, and maybe then another will ship it, and then another will retail it, and then another will be trading it. And throughout that chain, you've often got, if I talked in a European context, Shell and BP cooperating and competing vigorously. But it works incredibly well, and if you can do it there, you can do it in software. And after all, look at AWS. There's loads of people who compete with Amazon in some part of the world that use AWS, and neither they nor Amazon kind of seem to worry too much about it.
Right. Yeah. Is it like Netflix is on that, and Amazon also has its own streaming service?
Yeah,
and
Apple and Google. I've got Google's app on my phone. I use all the Google apps because they're better than the Apple ones. But I've got an Apple phone, and yet they compete on a whole bunch of other areas. So we can all be very grown up about this, but the difference in our case is that what we're fixing isn't, a slightly better way of accessing your email. It's genuinely fundamental to the future of our planet.
Yeah, yeah, and like physical software producing physical changes in how we get our energy and operate our lives. And yeah, well, okay, I think that's a great point to stop. We've covered a lot of ground here. Thank you.
I've noticed that there's an anti-nuclear religion that demonizes that technology. And what I'd like is if you could try to make your customers have the option to choose clean nuclear as one of the options besides wind and solar. And also I'd like you to consider whether any kinds of innovative nuclear plants, molten salt reactors, high temperature gas plants, or better yet, the coal to nuclear conversion. That's actually the quickest, cheapest way to decarbonize our economies, including industry.
Look, I'm cool with nuclear. I mean, at the moment, it's not in our mix to customers, but I've got no objection to it being. Other than in a lot of European countries, the regulation about what you can call green energy and what you can't excludes nuclear. And so it makes messaging, like it means that a lot of words that we would normally use to help people understand what's going on become a bit harder. But frankly,
is that like advertising it?
Yeah,
you're not allowed to say certain words about it, kind of thing.
And don't get me wrong, and it's not to be driven by the marketing. It's simply to say that I think we need to find new ways to do the opposite of demonizing it. Existing nuclear, in particular, right? It was madness when some nations turned off perfectly safe nuclear plants and started burning coal. I think if we can work out how to build nuclear cheap and fast, honestly, that would be really, I'd be positive towards that. In the meantime, what I don't want to do is hold off on doing what we can do. And you're quite right, we're doing, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not easy, but, and it's really hard persuading a lot of people in the political sphere that consumers love this stuff and they will win votes by doing, not lose votes. But we are getting there. The more of this we do, the easier the hard stuff gets.
What role does distributed renewables and storage play in helping us to get more renewables online?
We're so constrained in top-down delivery that bottom-up is often pragmatically going to be easier and faster. I hope we can kind of meet in the middle, i.e. do both. I sometimes think of the transition as being like amoeba in a Petri dish. You've got these little colonies, and over time they'll join up. And so when I was talking about the zero bills homes, one of the bits of magic there is we're not constrained by any form of regulation. We can just do it. Now, I think in a lot of parts of the United States, consumers, and indeed a lot of parts of Europe, consumers don't get paid for excess solar electricity generated on their property when it goes onto the grid. And that's just, it's complete madness because essentially we're asking people to make an investment which benefits the system, and yet they carry the cost and no benefit. And so I think, for example, regulatory change to make bottom-up work better is incredibly important as well. And we need that because if we're going to dynamically optimize your solar panels and other equipment in your home, and then essentially be using the timing of the time it goes on at the grid and comes off the grid to give you a zero bill, we can't do that if we're not getting paid for it.
How can we do something similar here in Texas and in the U.S.?
We're based in Houston in Texas. A challenge with Austin is that you have a municipal monopoly utility. Austin is like an incredible city, and we would love to be here. I can't say, Texas is amazing, right? The world sees it as the home of oil and gas, but it's also, for example, the home of an incredible amount of renewable generation, constrained by grids and all kinds of other problems, but at least Texas has discovered the economics of renewables, beats the economics of fossil fuels, and is living the talk. So.
And they're actually overtaking California now in renewable construction, which is like kind of a big, passing of the torch in a way. But
one of the things that I've noticed about the transition to renewables is that the storage of these renewables is often overlooked, and people don't really address how they're going to be storing all this energy for when we actually need it, because it's not always available. So I'm just wondering what Octopus is currently doing in terms of batteries and how we're storing that energy, whether it be in the home or grid scale.
The reason I talk a lot about trying to use renewables at the point they're being generated, for example, by optimizing electric car battery charging, or batteries in the home, the more we can do that, the less we need the really big grid level storage. That's not to say there's anything wrong with grid level storage, it's just it all costs money. And I think fundamentally one of the mind shift changes that we require in energy is that the energy transition is not like for like. Trying to make renewables and indeed nuclear and other technologies behave the same as fossil fuels will cost us a tremendous amount, and we'll miss out on a lot of the benefits of renewables. When you worry about the periods when generation is low, you forget just how incredible the opportunities at times generation is high. And you realize we could build entire industries. In fact, we're already, for example, in indoor farms. We've got 14 indoor farms on our customer books who've taught the crops to sleep when energy prices are high and to grow with light and heat when energy prices are low. We're capitalizing on the fundamentals of renewables there. If we tried to make renewables behave like fossil fuels by kind of flattening out the curve with storage, those farms would all be paying more for their electricity all the time, and we'd be missing out on cheap, locally grown, super healthy food. Now, the first thing then for me is, first of all, like, let's think hard about how we can make the most of this stuff when it's abundant. But for the times we can't use it, storage is important, and that's why I think Kraken controls 45% of UK grid level storage. Because again, the storage is not necessarily about trying to generate a rectangle. It's about really cleverly optimizing against several days' worth of weather forecasts, several days' worth of shiftable consumption. And the tech to do that is probably as important as the tech that does the storage itself. But different storage techs can be optimized in different ways. You know, some can only be cycled once a day, some cycled once a week, some cycled several times a day. So I think the interplay between all this is really important. One of the reasons that, I said to Carl that doing the easy stuff first is helpful is as we're doing the easy stuff, some of that that's quite hard is getting easier and easier and easier. It's also getting more economically efficient. The more that we use the electrons when they're abundant, the cheaper the electrons that we're putting into the storage in the first place. Therefore, the more cost-effective the storage is. I think this transition is full of incredibly virtuous cycles if we do that. So we haven't got all the solutions, but I think the direction, we're already in a better place than people ever imagined.
It seems to me that one of the very powerful tools that having a platform like yours allows is the creation of data on both the demand and the generation side. I'm curious about how your team and your platform utilizes data analytics, machine learning to optimize the platform, improve it, etc.
One of the magic things about really moving away from legacy software stacks with lots of different platforms is that all of the data is in one place. You can literally simultaneously analyze the impact of an email to a customer combined with whatever the weather forecast is, combined with the price on the dynamic tariff, combined with their driving habits. Because that stuff is what makes the difference. So I think what you're finding is you're analyzing data across lots of sets that were not necessarily obvious before. But in terms of the quantum, Octopus Energy in the UK processes, it receives over 1 billion new data points per day, all of which are fed into quite a lot of machine learning and kind of traditional algorithmic analysis engines. Things like every smart meter is forecast 2 years out at the half-hourly level with a forecast that was revised 4 times a day. And the ability to do that becomes, we do the same for generation. Every generation point is forecast way out into the future with very accurate forecasts for the next half hour, increasingly less accurate over the medium term. You look at the weather forecast, then just sort of best guess going forward. But what that lets you do is say, take an electric car. If we know it's going to be windy today, not very windy for 3 days, and then windy again, we actually need to optimize your car not on a daily cycle, but on a multi-day cycle. I think we're currently moving some of our smarter programs out to a 1 week ahead optimization schedule for a car. Now that'll get tweaked. Like every day, your schedule will get tweaked based on what we're learning, and we're just scratching the surface. But yeah, the data is colossal.
And you did it yourself. You immediately went to heavy industry and started talking about blast furnaces and so forth. And if you read the literature, yes, we do have to decarbonise heavy industry. But there is a vast swathe of small to medium enterprises which require process heat and who are telling us that fuel cells, heat pumps aren't doing it for them. And I'm fascinated to know what your company's approach to that small to medium enterprise is.
By doing what we do know best, you kind of make the economics of the stuff that we're not doing more and more attractive. Yeah. For example, take hydrogen. If we were to pump hydrogen into every home, we end up with incredibly high demand for hydrogen, very, very expensive hydrogen. We again see the benefits throughout our economy of cheaper processes.
I just wanted to ask, do you think what Octopus is doing could work in developing nations, particularly Africa in general?
I think there are 800 million people in the world that don't have access to power. And there's another roughly 1.5 billion that have access to reliable energy. In the way that the smartphone enabled many poorer nations to just leapfrog past the expensive infrastructure of, kind of fixed lines. So I think smart, optimized, renewable-based solutions can democratize cheap, clean power into, the entire world. We are not doing it ourselves yet, although we are looking for the right partners to start working with. The biggest challenge at the moment, and speak to some of the entrepreneurs doing this stuff, is unlocking funding into lower income countries, because Western funders are really, really nervous about putting money into economies they don't understand or to feel risky. And working with non-governmental organizations, I think we can do really good stuff. And I think the tech is now ready.
Yeah, well, I think we're at time, so I'll just say this was certainly one of the more like fun and enlightening and kind of surprising conversations with a clean tech executive that I've had. I mean, there's just like an unusual breadth of interesting things going on here, and I think what I love covering in the sector is proof points that show a more creative or a more cost-effective, cleaner approach is possible. And it's kind of like, I'm sure people have said many of these things are impossible, and then you went and did them, and they can't say it's impossible anymore because of that. So
I'll tell you what, though, never underestimate the power of people who don't want change to say, they'll say it's impossible, and then you do it, and they go, oh yeah, but that was just small scale. So you do it big scale, and they go, oh yeah, but that was just with one customer base. So you do it with another customer base, and you go, oh yeah, but that's just in one country. And you go, okay, look,
but
you just don't want this to happen,
and then
do you?
you're a multi-billion-dollar company, and you're going worldwide. So let's do a round of applause for Greg. Thank you.